Maybe you, like me, have watched the film The Man Who Would Be King. With great performances from Sean Connery and Michael Caine, not to mention Christopher Plummer and Saeed Jaffrey, it's a ripping 19th century adventure yarn. And it culminates in a fantastic piece of cinema, as the pair sing The Son of God Goes Forth to War, whilst Connery is sent plunging to his death from a rope bridge. It was only much later that I read the book upon which the film was based, and it got me thinking. Did the author, Rudyard Kipling, simply write a good tale? Or does his story have any historical basis? Well, after a fair bit of digging around, I have an answer, and it's every bit as good as the book and the film. So, welcome to The Man Who Would Be King. Film versus history. The Man Who Would Be King is one of a series of short stories written by Rudyard Kipling in his book The Phantom Rickshaw and Other Tales, published in 1888. Future Nobel Prize for Literature recipient and author of The Jungle Book and Kim, Kipling was just 22 at the time of writing this particular story and was working as a journalist in northern India. His story centres on two British adventurers, Daniel Dravot and Peachey Carnehan, both rogue ex-soldiers, who meet a young journalist working on a paper in northern India. Guess who? They share their plans to travel to the remote country of Kafiristan, high in the Hindu Kush, to make themselves kings. Sometime later, a bedraggled man enters the journalist's office. The vagrant turns out to be Peachey Carnehan, and he proceeds to recite the most incredible tale. He and Dravot had entered Afghanistan via the Khyber Pass, with Dravot disguised as a Muslim holy man and Peachey as his servant. And with them they carried 20 Martini Henry rifles. Having entered Afghanistan, they peeled off the Kabul road and headed through the inhospitable mountains to the north. Eventually arriving in Kafiristan, they found a people almost white who claimed descent from Alexander the Great's army that had travelled through the region to invade India. Using the modern rifles, they swiftly built a disciplined army, and Dravot was mistakenly regarded as a god. Their reputations further increased when they find that the locals practiced a form of Freemasonry, but that Dravot and Carnehan knew more of the rituals. Eventually, Dravot becomes king. But all good things come to an end, and it did for these two men, when Dravot decides to take a wife. Scared that she will die because she is marrying a god, the bride bites the king, drawing blood. Suddenly his subjects realise that Dravot is no god but merely a man, and they turn on them. The two men attempt to conduct a fighting retreat, but are captured. Dravot is forced to walk across a bridge suspended miles above a gorge, whilst the retaining ropes are cut. He falls to his death. Carnehan tells Kipling that it was a 20-mile drop, and it took Dravot half an hour to hit the floor. Meanwhile, Carnehan is crucified but survives. Now delirious from the torture, the trauma, and the sun, he produces a bag for Kipling, and inside is Dravot's shrivelled head, still wearing his crown. It's a great story, although actually the first story in the book, The Phantom Rickshaw itself, is a good little horror story too. In 1975, The Man Who Would Be King was made into a film, starring Sean Connery as Dravot and Michael Caine as Peachey Carnehan. Nominated for 4 Academy Awards, it also starred Christopher Plummer as Kipling and Saeed Jaffrey as their loyal Gurkha, Billy Fish. The moment that the men are captured and Dravot is forced to walk across that bridge to his death is a fantastic cinema moment. As Connery walks across the bridge and his former subjects start cutting the ropes, he starts to sing The Son of God Goes Forth to War.
A glorious band, the chosen few on whom the Spirit came.
And whilst it's normally sung to the tune All Saints New, in the film it's sung to the tune The Minstrel's Boy, or The Marine. The singing doesn't appear in the books, but as I say, it's a great cinema moment. As an aside, the hymn was one of General George Patton's favourites and was sung at his funeral. Apart from that, the film is pretty true to the book, not just in the storyline, but actually very true to the script too. However, in Kipling's book, Billy Fish was a local chieftain and not a Gurkha, as portrayed in the film by Saeed Jaffrey, and so no wild Gurkha charge against the attackers in the book either. Another slight deviation in the film is that Caine leaves the room and Christopher Plummer then peers into a bag that he's left, and inside is the severed head of Daniel Dravot, still wearing his crown. Whereas in the book, Peachey Carnehan, having shown it to Kipling, walks out with it. He's later found delirious in the midday sun without a hat, and Kipling takes him to an asylum, where he dies shortly afterwards. When Kipling inquires about the bag, it, together with Dravot's head and the precious gold crown, had disappeared. Well, you might not be surprised to find out that it was not filmed in Kafiristan or Afghanistan, but in Morocco. And when Sean Connery, Daniel Dravot, tumbles from the bridge, he doesn't fall 20 miles to his death. Actually, Connery didn't fall at all, as it was left to a stuntman. That particular moment in the film saw Michael Caine reunited with a fellow cast member from the epic war film Zulu. Any ideas who? Well, it's Joe Powell, who played Sergeant Windridge, who, by the way, was a real person at the Battle of Rorke's Drift. Powell was born in 1922 in West London, and at the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, aged just 17, he joined the Grenadier Guards. A keen boxer, he later transferred to No. 4 Special Commando, where he participated in Operation Abercrombie, which was a reconnaissance raid near Boulogne, the Dieppe raid in 1942, and then D-Day. He was with No. 4 Commando when they were the first commandos ashore on D-Day 1944, landing on Sword Beach. After the war, he became a film extra at Pinewood Studios and became a founding partner in the film stunt team established by Captain Jock Easton. Easton was also a World War II veteran, having been a member of the SAS participating in Operation Tombola in northern Italy in 1945. As a stuntman, Easton doubled for Gregory Peck in Guns of Navarone. Joe Powell was also in that film when he completed a stunt falling 90 feet into the sea. His fall in The Man Who Would Be King was in a different league altogether. The drop from the bridge to the gorge bottom was 400 feet. To break his fall and keep him alive, a small platform had been erected jutting out from the cliff 90 feet below the bridge and out of sight of the cameras. If Powell missed that platform, it was certain death. Michael Caine couldn't watch as his old chum from Zulu dropped from view. And if you slow up the film, you can see that far from tumbling, Powell goes into a well-rehearsed and highly professional drop. Ever the professional, Joe Powell carried out the stunt successfully and went on to be described as one of the great British stuntmen, with 3 Bond films to his credit, as well as, appropriately for a D-Day veteran, The Longest Day. He died in 2016, aged 94. Well, I hope you enjoyed going down that particular rabbit hole, but now we come to the crucial question. Does the film and the book have any historical basis? Well, more than you might think. For a start, Kafiristan was a real place. A remote and little visited area in the Hindu Kush mountains of northeastern Afghanistan. Unlike its neighbours in Afghanistan and British-controlled Chitral to the east, the people were not Muslims, hence the name given to the region by the Afghan Muslims, Kafiristan, or Land of the Infidel. They practiced a religion that combined animism, ancestor worship, and some trappings from ancient Buddhist and Hindu traditions that had at some time made their way into the remote valleys. Consequently, they had fought wars over several hundred years with their neighbours, especially the Afghans, who attempted to convert them to Islam. Indeed, in Kipling's actual story, although not in the film, the 2 Englishmen drill the army of Kafiristan to specifically resist incursions from their Muslim enemies, principally from Afghanistan. Ethnically different to the Afghans, the region was inhabited by the Kalash people, whose origins are shrouded in mystery. Some claim that they were descended from soldiers marching with Alexander the Great. Some of them do have very fair skin and hair. And Kipling's characters certainly believed this story and saw them as almost like Englishmen rather than Indians or Afghans. It is historically true that Alexander the Great did indeed pass through what is now Afghanistan, and indeed he built a city, Alexandria in the Caucasus, at the foothills of the Hindu Kush, close to the modern city of Bagram, which is more famous in recent times for its airbase. Fascinating though this legend is, DNA research has found no Greek origins within the Kalash, but very strong lines to Central Asia and also very early Indian cultures. So, at the time that Kipling wrote this story, Kafiristan was still, to all intents and purposes, independent, Despite the Emir of Afghanistan claiming the territory, he had no way of enforcing his rule from Kabul. As far as the British were concerned, it was a remote and unknown part of the world. Apart from the sheer remoteness and physical endeavour required to reach Kafiristan, any such expedition would run the risk of attacks by local Afghan warlords and therefore was strictly forbidden by the British government. So Kafiristan was a rough area on maps, and not much else. And thus it was a land of mystery for people like Kipling, and a place of opportunity for adventurers like his two characters in The Man Who Would Be King. Eventually, in the mid-1890s, a few years after Kipling had written his story, the Afghans and the British finally agreed a border. The Durand Line still demarcates the boundary between Afghanistan and Pakistan to this day. And with the creation of the Durand Line, most of the Kalesh people fell on the Afghan side of the border. And from 1895 through to 1896, the Afghans finally conquered the area, converting the inhabitants to Islam. They even gave Kafiristan a new name, Nuristan, the land of the enlightened. Meanwhile, a smaller Kalesh community continued to reside on the British side of the Durand Line. Originally in 5 valleys to the west of Chitral, they can still be found hanging on to their ancient customs and beliefs in 3 valleys in Pakistan. Okay, so Kafiristan, now Nuristan, was a real place. But what about Daniel Dravot and Peachey Carnehan? Was there really a man or men who would be king? Well, the answer is both no and yes. Was Kipling's story about a real event? No. Both of his characters are fictional. Were there similar stories that inspired him? Most certainly. And those forgotten tales about real 19th century adventurers are every bit as fascinating as his own story and the film. It would seem that Kipling got some of his descriptions of Kafiristan, the land, its people and their customs, from the travel writings of Alexander Gardner, who claimed to have been the first Westerner to visit the region back in the 1820s. If Kafiristan and the origin of its people are hazy, so is the story of Alexander Gardner. The American was born in 1785 in what is now Wisconsin. Educated at a Jesuit school in Ireland, he then travelled via Cairo to join his brother in the Russian city of Astrakhan. Situated where the Volga flows into the Caspian Sea, Astrakhan had been captured by Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century. It became the centre of operations both militarily and commercially as Russia attempted to expand her influence into Persia and Central Asia. In 1819, Gardner left the Russian city and for the next decade explored Central Asia, during which time he claimed he visited Kafiristan. The only problem with his claims and his stories is that all the information comes from his own memoirs written decades later, which include a lot of adventures that are so incredible that even people at the time wondered where fact met fiction. What we do know is that in the 1830s he served as an artillery colonel in the army of Ranjit Singh, the Sikh emperor. He was still serving in the capital, Lahore, at the outbreak of the First Anglo-Sikh War in the 1840s. And whilst I don't mention him in my mini-series on the Anglo-Sikh Wars, he does make an appearance in George MacDonald Fraser's Flashman and the Mountain of Light. So both his descriptions of Kafiristan and its people might, along with his own colourful and adventurous life, have given some ideas to Kipling. Who knows? Another adventurer who might have acted as a model was Josiah Harlan. This American adventurer from Philadelphia travelled to both Punjab in India and then Afghanistan with the intention of making himself a king. He, like Gardner, served the Sikh Maharaja, Ranjit Singh, before then crossing the border into Afghanistan disguised as a holy man and making his way to Kabul. Through the 1830s he served the Emir of Afghanistan, Dost Muhammad, leading armies against his opponents. And whilst he never became a king, he was rewarded for his services with the title of Prince of Ghor. Harlan left Afghanistan when the British ousted his patron, Dost Muhammad, at the outbreak of the First Anglo-Afghan War in 1839. He returned to his native USA, where, upon the outbreak of the US Civil War, he raised a cavalry unit, Harlan's Light Cavalry, for the Union Army. The former Prince of Afghanistan's military career finally ended in 1862 when he collapsed whilst campaigning in Virginia and was medically discharged. Josiah Harlan died from tuberculosis in San Francisco in 1871. His photos bear more than a passing resemblance to the physical traits that Kipling wrote of Daniel Dravot, not least his large beard. And that's not the only similarity. Rather like Dravot, he had a definite desire to be a king. He also entered Afghanistan disguised as a holy man and won favour with his military experience. Finally, like both Dravot and Carnehan, he was a Freemason. As too was Rudyard Kipling. Harlan's stories would still have been doing the rounds at Freemason meetings in India in the 1880s, when Kipling wrote The Man Who Would Be King. Frederick Wilson was from Wakefield, Yorkshire. When he was 19, he arrived in India and enlisted in the East India Company's Bengal Army. He served as a private in the First Anglo-Afghan War in the early 1840s, but deserted soon afterwards. He turned up in the remote Harzal region, to the west of the old Gurkha lands in the Himalayas, an area under the lightest of British control, or rather, control more in name than in reality. Initially, he established a thriving business shooting game birds to supply plumes for Europe's hat industry. Having made a small fortune from that venture and annihilating the local game population, he moved on to his next venture. He persuaded the local ruler to grant him the rights to fell timber in the area, and rapidly became a very wealthy man. He's also accused of the deforestation of the area too. Nevertheless, with his wealth, he was soon styling himself as the Raja of Harsil. He even went so far as to mint his own coins with his head on. Wilson can actually be seen on the left of this picture of the palace that he built for himself. Eventually, the locals turned on him and he was forced to flee his self-proclaimed kingdom, rather similar to the events in The Man Who Would Be King. But rather than having to walk across a rope bridge, he was able to get clean away. Once more landing on his feet, he established an upmarket hotel at a British hill station, before dying in 1883. Just before his death, one of his guests was a young 17-year-old journalist, Rudyard Kipling. I wonder what tales he told young Rudyard about setting himself up as a Raja in a remote mountain area, and then minting his own regal coins. Apart from Alexander Gardner, the other adventurer who actually visited Kafiristan and thus influenced Kipling was William Watts McNaire. McNaire was just in his 30s when he accompanied the British Army as a surveyor into Afghanistan during the Second Anglo-Afghan War. A few years later, in 1883, he organised an expedition into Kafiristan. As the British authorities had issued strict orders that no one should cross into the area without their permission, his was a clandestine adventure, just like Dravot and Carnehan. And just like Dravot and some of our other adventurers, he crossed the border into Afghanistan dressed as a Muslim holy man. Travelling through the Khyber Pass, he then veered north into Kafiristan, where he continued his charade of being a holy man. Eventually word reached him that his cover had been blown, and fearing for his safety, he beat a hasty retreat back across the border to the Chitral area in British India. McNaire published an account of his adventure in The Pioneer, one of two Indian papers that Kipling was working on at the time. He then went on to present his findings to the Royal Geographical Society in London. His story was a sensation, a journey to an area no other Briton had travelled to. During his talk, he showed off an antique seal, which he thought had belonged to one of Alexander the Great's soldiers, who had brought it to the Hindu Kush Mountains from ancient Babylon. For him, it proved that the Kalesh were descended from Alexander's soldiers, and it was a theme picked up in Kipling's story. He also talked about how the people of Kafiristan fought each other and the Mohammedans, as he called them, from Afghanistan. Likewise, Dravot organised his army to defend his new kingdom from those same invaders. McNaire also spoke of how the people worshipped stones and that they recognised a supreme being, Imbra. Carnehan, when recounting their adventure to Kipling, talks about such stones, the largest of which they also called Imbra. Some at the time questioned whether McNaire had really entered Kafiristan proper, or merely the Kalesh region on the British side of the border. Sir George Scott Robertson asked why he didn't include the names of any of the villages that he'd visited. It should be noted, however, that Robertson fancied himself as a bit of an explorer, so maybe there was some rivalry or even sour grapes in his challenge. Robertson would himself go on to explore Kafiristan in the early 1890s, a few years after Kipling had published The Man Who Would Be King. He was also the British commander during the Siege of Chitral in 1895, but that, as they say, is for another day. Whatever the truth about his expedition, it seems that many aspects of McNaire's reports and presentations were picked up and used by Kipling in his own adventure story. Finally, there is one more adventurer who may well have inspired Kipling. James Brooke was known as the White Raja of Sarawak, an area of North Borneo granted to him by the Sultan of Brunei. Now, you might think that as Brooke's kingdom was far from India's northwest frontier, he's a bit of an outlier as an inspiration. However, both Raja Brooke himself and his fiefdom of Sarawak are specifically mentioned as something to emulate on at least 2 occasions by Dravot and Carnehan in the book. And unlike Gardner, Harlan, Wilson or McNaire, Brooke really did have his own kingdom, and 3 generations of his family ruled it as White Rajas until after the Second World War. So, whilst Daniel Dravot and Peachey Carnehan were not real, there were plenty of adventurers around at that time who certainly tried their very best to be the man who would be king. Well, there you go. A great story from a great story writer, and a fantastic film too. And with a little bit more history than you might have expected than a simple 19th century adventure yarn. Sometimes real history is even more intriguing than a made-up story. And if nothing else, you also now know about the stuntman Joe Powell, and you'll be humming this particular song for the rest of the day. How about finding out about James Brooke, the White Raja of Sarawak? A link's appearing now. A huge thank you to everybody who generously supports my work, and there are details on how you can do so in the description. But above all, thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.